Well, greetings, imagination tears and Robservers. It is I, your Fuhrer of Fun, King Waspinator. Now, I'm making a special video here in an attempt to actually try to get some sort of debate going on with old Robert Meyer Burnett. I don't really like sending super chats, so I don't really get much of a chance to get direct engagement that way. I guess I could write some meandering letter, all high off my ass in the middle of the night. But, I don't know. Why do that when I could record a meandering videotape while I'm high off my ass in the middle of the night? So, here we are. I got four basic points I'd like to go over regarding modern Star Trek and some things kind of evolving and revolving around that subject. So, here we go with point number one. So I guess my first point I want to make is really, I guess, a bit more of a general observation. It's subjective and it's hard to prove. However, just at least from what I've seen over the course of my life of being a lifelong Star Trek fan, raised by an original generation Trekkie, Star Trek fans have always kind of had a love-hate relationship with Star Trek. Maybe less so in the 60s and 70s when all they had was the original series. But from my childhood on, TNG, there's controversy about that between people who, this isn't art by Star Trek. You couldn't like, real Star Trek fans wouldn't like this trash. It's just full of a bunch of political posturing and feminist agendas and a bunch of just woke nonsense. And just forced diversity, all that kind of stuff that people are saying now about Discovery, you could say about TNG. Even down to like, the writing and the acting isn't as good as it could be. Yeah, that was TNG. Star Trek Picard, taking your utopian Star Trek future and making it a little dour, suddenly throwing in money and conflict between characters and characters that have drug problems and all other slew of just regular old everyday average modern day issues and things that have no place in the Star Trek future. Well, then I guess you don't like Deep Space Nine, because Deep Space Nine was full of internal conflict and money and a much more nuanced, quote-unquote, grounded, gritty outlook on Star Trek. Star Trek Enterprise full of too much technobabble? Well, then I guess you probably don't like Star Trek Voyager. Star Trek Picard and Star Trek Discovery have like too much of a fast-paced, forward-thrusting, doesn't ever give you time to breathe kind of pace, and each episode just leads into other episodes to a point where it's kind of hard to even remember what the specific episode stories were. Well, then you definitely aren't going to like Season 3 of Enterprise, the whole Xindi season. These have always been issues, and in many ways I think a chunk of the criticism that's going on about Star Trek right now was inevitable. It was always going to be the case, because real Star Trek fans, real nerds, are uptight, nitpicky, bitter people. I know. So anyway, I guess on to point number two. My sweet, delicious Michael Burnham. I've never bought into the complaints about Michael Burnham. Almost everything people bitch about her, like they might be valid things to bitch about her in terms of her attitude and always knowing what to do and always seeming to have an answer. She's a know-it-all, and she's really talented, and she's too smart, and she always wants to be the center of attention. Well, if you're a human child raised and educated on Vulcan and was smart enough to get through, Vulcan school and potentially get nominated to go to the Vulcan Science Academy, and if it wasn't for some hinky political shit behind the scenes that Sarek was having to deal with, she totally would have gone on to the Vulcan Science Academy instead of joining Starfleet. It makes total sense for Michael Burnham's character to behave and act and have the skill level that she portrays. Sorry, I'm quite fine with Michael Burnham. Albeit, I did largely just buy this poster to annoy people, because I know pretty much anyone watching this video just has a reflex of hate for all things Star Trek Discovery and CBS All Access. And, well, I guess that brings me on to point number 3. This is just a hypothesis, of course. And it actually goes back to something I've been thinking since around 2016, maybe a little bit earlier, but it really started to crystallize when Ghostbusters 2016 came out. And actually before it came out, and all the online controversy that it generated. I at times can't help but wonder if there is some sort of negative publicity angle that some of these studios and companies are purposely doing. They're purposely trying to agitate and annoy the fan bases because it gets people talking about this stuff. For a show that has the actual numbers in terms of ratings that the current crop of Star Trek shows have, all this negative talk that YouTube and the online blogging community and whatnot is giving about Star Trek is way raising its profile way above the actual buzz level it should have just based on actual viewership. Because if only the people watching it were talking about it, it'd be kind of a low simmer. You'd barely hear it over people talking about stupid documentaries about the origins of hip-hop on Netflix and stuff like that. But everyone hates on it, and it's kind of geared ahead of time to hate on it. A lot of these things, it hasn't just been Star Trek. Star Wars has played this trick. Ghostbusters, obviously. There's been others. Captain Marvel. By pre-agitating the fan base with political posturing that's by and large not even accurately reflecting what's in the product that's put in front of people by the time it's actually released. They get people geared up so that they're already going to not accept it. They're already going to be queued up and ready to be looking through this whole filter they have put over their perceptions with this checklist of all these various woke items that they're looking for. And so they see even the slightest little dog whistling thing, and like, bam, look, yep, there it is. They're pushing their agenda on us, giving them reason then to agitate further and keep the buzz going. And one could contend with Star Trek that the hope is that we'll see, we have all these old-fashioned fuddy-duddy toxic fans, and they don't like this, and so hopefully hip young Americans who don't want anything to do with that older generation, they're going to want to support the show and watch it. That might have been the intent with Ghostbusters 2016, but I think they've shown time and time again that that's not a reliable way to get asses in seats, let us say. But, as I say, it does raise the profile of these things. And in Star Trek in particular, their goal necessarily isn't to get asses in seats. Their whole thing is to prop up and be the, pun intended, flagship for CBS All Access's streaming service. And their criteria for success is massively different than what it would be if these shows were being aired live on network television weekly. And so they can afford for them to fail in a way. They can afford for them to be designed to agitate in a way that a movie studio can't necessarily. They can dip their toe in trying to stir those waters, but if it actually leads to their film flopping, they can't do that a lot because they still actually have to have cash money returns. All Star Trek has to do is just cause CBS All Access's numbers to balloon a little bit, and even if they don't balloon quite as much as their super wishful projections might have wanted them to, as long as it balloons a little bit, they can go to their stockholders and shareholders and say, hey, look, everything's fine with CBS All Access. Give us more investment money and so we can make more of this Star Trek stuff, because every time we release some Star Trek, we get a little balloon of people tuning in and actually watching this piece of shit streaming service we got. So, Point number 4. Are Star Trek Discovery and Star Trek Picard perfect and exactly what I would have wanted them to be? Hell no. Like any good Trekkie, years ago I wrote out outlines for what I'd do with a Star Trek series if I was given it. And then years later, Stargate Atlantis kind of ripped me off, even though obviously they had no reason to actually know they were ripping me off, and it's not the most original of ideas, but I was thinking, like, take Star Trek further into the future, send them to another galaxy, whole new crew, maybe a little collection of ships, you know, because they're out there trying to explore a whole galaxy, and since they're so far away, you know, they're purposefully cut off from Starfleet in a way that Voyager was accidentally cut off from Starfleet. Kind of a dynamic, maybe using like Borg warp conduits to traverse the great distance between, you know, Milky Way and Andromeda, or something like that. Unfortunately, Stargate Atlantis, it took the air out of that whole proposal. Not that anyone in a million years is ever going to see it, because I'm a nobody. However, that being said, obviously this Star Trek isn't what I wanted it to be. With the movies that the Bad Robot produced and the Secret Hideout series, all of them are treading water that we've already been in. The J.J. Abrams trilogy, even though Simon Pegg, you know, wrote the last one, it's all part of what the trilogy that Abrams started, so it might as well just call it the J.J. Abrams trilogy. The Kelvin timeline. Stupid name. Recreating the old crew with recasting Kirk and Spock, completely unnecessary, and kind of does a detriment to the characterizations that the original actors gave to those characters. Because even if, yes, the cast was plucky and had good chemistry and they're all nice to look at, none of them captured those original characters at all. Maybe Carl Urban's McCoy came close, but that's about it. But Chris Pine's Kirk wasn't Kirk. Zachary Quinto's Spock was definitely not Spock. So not Spock. And Benedict Cumberbatch's Khan was so not Khan. But anyway, retreading old ground. Star Trek Discovery, on the surface, a new ship, new crew, new characters, but because it's set 10 years in front of the original series and has a character who has familial ties with one of the main characters of the original series, it leans real heavy on the original series when it has to, especially in the second season for obvious reasons, which we don't need to go into at this moment. And then Picard, it's got Picard back, which I kind of feel like more than anything else is a way, by having gotten Patrick Stewart to do the show, it kind of puts a seal of approval of everything that Bad Robot and Secret Hideout have done in terms of, like, this cements it into, like, nope, sorry guys, this wasn't just a bad dream. This is part of Star Trek. It's part of Star Trek canon. It's always going to be here moving forward. You're never going to get rid of this shit now. And it is what it is. But I'm able to put up with Discovery and Picard and salvage what's likable about these shows and overlook the flaws they have, as I have done with Star Trek my entire life, because it's always been clunky, low budget, dudes in pajamas running around on fake cave sets. You know, Quark, Rom, and Nog time travel by releasing some fakey element called chemosite into their warp core as they fly into an atom bomb explosion. That is no more or less pulled out of the ass technobabble bullshit than anything Discovery has done with their Iron Man time suits and mushroom teleportation drives. I guess the real question, the reason why I tolerate them, is because J.J. Abrams did such a horrible job with Star Trek Into Darkness, which is hands down the worst Star Trek movie of them all, way worse than the whales, way worse than Star Trek V where they go to meet God, way worse than Insurrection, way worse than Nemesis, worse than Generations. Star Trek Into Darkness is so terribly bad that as long as anything made after Into Darkness is not as bad as Into Darkness, then it counts as a technical improvement. As time goes on, either Secret Hideout is going to get their shit together and get used to making this thing and get better at doing it just from sheer repetition and bulk of time, or they will slowly get flushed out of the system, and as further Star Treks of whatever incarnation they are get made, we'll slowly get an improvement in the storytelling quality, which is really what most legitimate complaints about this show really have anything to say, is that it is a little lacking in the whole, moral lesson of the week kind of quality, the Star Trek that Star Trek low-key had, and it never seemed to be the thing that people cited the most. People always cited the technology and the characters, but it was the little moral plays. They're like little Bible stories. I've been saying for years that I was raised on Star Trek the way Christians were raised on Bible TV and stuff. Probably explains a few things, but that's neither here nor there. As long as Discovery and Picard are better than Star Trek Into Darkness, I'm willing to live with it, and I'm willing to be patient. Because here's another, truth of it all. As Star Trek fans, we want Star Trek to be better, right? Right? The more sane, savvy type critics will often say and note that it's like there's good ideas, good settings, good characters. They're just not used to their fullest potential. Well, they're not going to get used to any potential if the fan base burns the franchise down to the ground and just a massive tantrum huff. There's got to be a way to constructively criticize these things so that they'll listen to the criticism. Because if they just feel like they're being attacked, they're going to shut off. And I guess this ties a little bit earlier to my whole thing about the negative publicity theory, is by having created this living meme that there is such a thing as toxic fandom, it shields production crews from criticism. It generates buzz, gets people talking about it. I mean, the computer algorithms don't care if you're being positive or negative about Star Trek Picard. They just know you're making videos of Star Trek Picard in the title and being said over and over again. So they just know that it's got engagement. That's all the computer cares about. And since the people back at home office are just looking at computer readouts, that's what they care about. They see that Star Trek Picard's a hot topic and they love it. And if the part of what's making it a hot topic is that it's pissing everyone off, their motivation to stop pissing people off is kind of low. So, as I say, we don't want to burn it to the ground. If we make too big of a stink about it being a piece of shit, eventually they're going to give up. And if it has that level of stench upon it, no one's ever going to want to pick it up again. We want it to still be considered to be viable. Look at the trouble that right now Paramount is having, getting anyone to pick up and finance a Star Trek 4. Even if it's recast with new directors and Quentin Tarantino, blah, 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 no one wants to fucking throw money at it. They like, hey, we'll put Chris Hemsworth in it. He'll show full frontal nudity. Just please give us money for Star Trek 4. Nothing. Because as far as a film franchise goes, J.J. Abrams wrecked it and left a really bad taste in a movie-going audience mouth. There's like almost nothing positive said by anybody about those movies except for they look good. Well, looks aren't everything. Good-looking science fiction is great, but it is a mass secondary to well-thought-out science fiction. And intelligent science fiction is something that's been lacking for decades now. It could in large part just be a simple problem that most of the writers for television and film right now are all products of plush, well-off, dare I say, privileged upbringings, whose only experience of life was going to college and schmoozing with Hollywood celebrities after they graduated. And that's why they're able to get the gigs that they get. That's why Alex Kurtzman and J.J. Abrams get all the assignments they get. It's not because they turn in quality products. It's because they know who's asked to kiss and in just the right way. And these are the people who are then like having to write science fiction. Like way back in the day in the 60s, like all the great old science fiction writers of old, a lot of them were World War II vets. I'm pretty sure Rod Serling from The Twilight Zone, I'm pretty sure he had served. Gene Roddenberry served. Like that, these are all people who had experienced harsh shit in their own real life, in their face, had to face death and destruction and witnessed terrible things and sometimes do terrible things. And be around and in the middle of one of the greatest accelerations of human technological prowess that we have ever had in our entire long history. And so they brought that with them to their writing. And so, of course, the science fiction produced in the 50s and 60s and 70s was a cut above in terms of thoughtfulness and characterization and just a bunch of other things. There's a reason why older science fiction was better, because the people writing that science fiction had actually lived lives. None of us, like for all my ideas, for all Robert Meyer Burnett's ideas, for all the ideas of most of the people watching any of this stuff right now, your ideas aren't really informed by much of anything, because with a few exceptions, most of us live pampered little lives of video games and working our easy little jobs and coming home to our little nice comfortable lives, staring at the internet and complaining of just the audacity that a species that has been through the absolute nightmare of survival that we have had to go through, to crawl through, to get to this point of history and civilization, so that we can then all lose our hair because Star Trek Picard's reboot series, I'm not quite sure what to call it, isn't up to snuff. Really? This is the worst thing in our lives? This is all we got to complain about? Fucking nerds, man. So anyway, I wanted to end this little video off with something positive and clean feeling, not just getting myself all worked up thinking about Star Trek. So, this is my current Lego project that I just got finished. It's not a moon, it's a gas station, is I think the running title I'm going with it. I've mixed various space sets, a volcano set, a burger joint, and a gas station set together to make a lunar refueling port. It's got a little monorail, we got some space criminals making a little heist with some space bucks. Got a couple of cops chilling out behind the gas station sign. You got some scientists and technicians up here in Mission Control. We got our little burger joint, which is in front of the volcano, which is why the burger joint has fire on it. The volcano perfectly attached to this little Star Trek Death Star cannon. And we got Obi-Wan and Darth Maul fighting over here. Obi-Wan has the high ground, of course. And there's the Mandalorian and Cara Dune talking to this little robot guy. And then over here by the gas station, we got like a technician about to refuel this here shuttle. And we got a couple of space people having another chat over here by the pumps. And way back here, we got an astronaut coming out of the gas station carrying a hot dog.